From the open season property studio, welcome to SuperTalk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi, because we are the capital of the outdoors in America. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful SuperTalk Mississippi Radio Network. You can also listen to SuperTalk Outdoors on supertalk.fm, Amazon Alexa, the SuperTalk Mississippi app, or on SuperTalk TV at Cspire TV. But some of you are watching on YouTube or Facebook or listening on your favorite podcast. We really appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate the feedback. We want to be there whenever, wherever you want to, and however you want to engage in the show. It's June the 10th, 2024. It's amazing how fast this year is going by. Hey, listen, I had the opportunity, in fact, it was posted today, to visit recently with Ramsey Russell of GetDucks.com. He has this great podcast called Duck Season Somewhere. And we spent a whole show together and talked about speaking truth to power. It's really the story, my story, and how I came to be involved in SuperTalk Outdoors and some of the issues that we're involved with. So if you've listened to Duck Season Somewhere podcast before, you can go there on Spotify or your favorite podcast platform and listen. And if you haven't, I really encourage you to go take a listen to it. He has a wide variety of guests. Listen, Ramsey travels the world. It is amazing what he does. And he brings such a perspective to the conversations. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you will too. You'll learn a lot about why this show came to be, and you'll actually learn a lot about Ramsey as well from listening to the show. Hey, listen, I got a note recently from Argentina. Our friend Commissioner Billy Munger was duck hunting down in Argentina. And while he was there, he said, "Man, Ricky, I got somebody I want you to meet. I think someone would be a great guest for your show." And his name is Frank Rohwer, and he has a PhD. We'll talk about his background here in just a second. But he's the president and chief scientist for Delta Waterfowl. And I ended up doing some research. I actually watched a testimony he gave at Congress and began to really appreciate the work that he's doing. How his incredible education. It was just meant to be, and we'll talk about that more here in just a second. But Frank is a guy that needs to be a regular guest on this show as we continue to remind people the importance around duck habitat and the breeding ground and so on. And we'll talk more about that here in just a second. But without any further ado, let me welcome Dr. Frank Rohwer. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with his last name. To SuperTalk Outdoors. Frank, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Ricky. Thank you. Great to be here, by the way.
Well, you got to spend some time with Billy Munger, but, I tell you, he is a fine commissioner here in this state. We are proud to have him. And I think he represents a best practice for the kind of commissioner we want to have, who always is going to put science first. He understands the biopolitics of things, but he is a very thoughtful person who's going to do what's right for the state every time. How did you get to know Billy?
Billy served on the Delta Waterfowl Foundation board for a number of years and was a great board member. And like you say, really engaged, understands, habitat and duck breeding biology. And I was frankly very impressed when he stepped down from the Delta board, because he didn't want a conflict of interest with his role on the commission, which is, that's pretty impressive. He's a super honest and really believes in the science. So I like the man a lot. So.
Well, listen, what's interesting about his story, in fact, I had him on just a few weeks ago. I've had him on several times, but I had him on a few weeks ago. As you begin to appreciate, this is a subject that's always been important to him for a long time. Like he was sending commissioners and employees from the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks here in Mississippi to some best practice locations around duck habitat and enhancement of ducks long before he became a commissioner. But this is something that's near and dear to his heart. And, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I mean, oftentimes some of the leaders, you don't know who they are because they don't really want any attention. He gets attention these days because he's on the commission, but you get to meet people like that across these United States on a regular basis, don't you?
I do, and it's a pleasure. I tell you what, I have the best job in the world. There's no doubt about it.
Hey, listen, I had the opportunity early in my career to be on what is called the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Gulf of Mexico program. And as part of that effort, we studied the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem and the work that had been done to bring it back from the brink, literally the brink, and you know that better than anybody. I became known. I got to learn a lot about the National Estuary Program. Eventually, parts of the Mississippi Sound were actually inducted into that. But you know, the Chesapeake Bay early in your life had a profound impact on you, didn't it?
It really did. We moved there when I was a kid. I was in about fourth or fifth grade, and I saw it at its heyday. And then in my time through high school and my undergraduate years, I really watched the Chesapeake fall apart, and it was terribly sad. And then I spent a bunch of years away when I was in school, and I came back to the University of Maryland right when the Chesapeake was really starting to recover. Rockfish were taking off, and they had gotten to where they were just like you couldn't find a rockfish. So it was pretty remarkable. It went from the most productive estuary in the world to one that was really in sad shape. So that was a cool experience. So, yeah.
You have a really good education, but it seemed clear to me, as I mentioned at the opening, that working in duck land, focused on ducks and duck habitat and duck biology, it was going to be in your DNA, wasn't it?
It really was. I got pretty lucky, and I have an older brother who's in science, and I went out to Kansas and helped him with some work that was for his PhD, and I was in high school. And my reward for that work was to go out and go duck hunting. And I'd started duck hunting in Maryland marshes, and they had fallen apart. And for me, a big duck day was 2 ducks. Man, that was big. And then I went to Kansas and saw all those mallards in the Midwest and said, I want to go to Kansas State. And got lucky, went to Kansas State and found out about Delta, and basically became a nuisance to the Delta staff until they hired me way too early, in their opinion. But I really enjoyed it, and so I got to work at Delta as an undergraduate, and then for my graduate degree. So.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an important organization. We'll get into some of the intricacies of it here in just a second. But if you were just telling someone and you're on the elevator what Delta Waterfowl is all about, tell us what your short story is.
We started as strictly a research organization, and we spent 80 years doing nothing but research. And then we've blossomed into an organization that does an awful lot of advocacy and management. So we're out there working to try and protect prairie potholes and slow down the drainage rate, protect wetlands so that we can have great duck breeding habitat. And then the other thing we do is we're focused an awful lot on making the habitat that we protected productive. It's a little surprising that we protected a lot of habitat and then it has terrible nest success. So, and then the third program I really like is working to protect this legacy of hunting. Hunting's been in my blood since I was 10, and I think it really helps kids to get out and get in the outdoors and see real animals instead of just video games. And so we've tried to promote hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation, and we've got a couple of really cool programs there. So,
hey, listen, so people can fully appreciate the influence you have on the conversations around duck. Tell them about your recent testimony.
Well, that was kind of interesting. We have recognized that Congress plays a huge role in habitat protection and wildlife management, and has since the turn of the century in 1900. And so we worked pretty hard with some lobbyists, and frankly the Delta folks work very close with Kel McGinnis and the DU folks in Washington D.C. So we're lobbying to do legislation that's good for ducks. But one of the things we gotten our folks to work on is something called the Hen Act, and it's an act and it's in the big scheme of government funding, it's a small amount of money, but it's millions of dollars to try and help promote duck production. in particular, and do a bunch of things that really help mallard productivity. So, and that was just a ton of fun, going up there and testifying. And frankly, I had a softball. I watched the deputy director get hammered over the Endangered Species Act, and I thought, you poor bugger. These guys got you on the ropes, and they're just working him over. But it was
hey, listen, we'll talk specifically about what you discussed. It had a lot to do with breeding ground and why that's important for us to keep the focus on that, and why some states still struggle with spending money in the breeding ground. So it's an amazingly important statement to make. Yep. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to SuperTalk Outdoors from the Open Season Properties studio. Listen, Open Season Properties is a full-service real estate company with a team approach philosophy that ensures your needs are of the highest priority, whether it's rural, land sales, residential, or commercial properties. Open Season Properties markets and sells real estate in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. And they're dedicated to the development of long-term client relationships and unwavering commitment to service. Go to openseasonproperties.com to learn more. We are thrilled to have them as the primary sponsor and the sponsor of the studio here. I'd love to be able to say we're coming to you from the Open Season Properties studio. Now let's get back to our guest. He's Dr. Frank Rohwer. He's the president and chief scientist for Delta Waterfowl. When we went to break, though, we were talking about this important organization that he's involved in and this testimony that he had the opportunity to give. But there are some fundamental points you were making in your testimony. And I think we sometimes in this duck conversation, because there are all these theories, we tend to lose a little sight that we cannot take our eyes off the breeding ground. This is an important part of the conversation. So why don't you kind of give a sense of that?
Yeah, it really is, Ricky. We've learned over the last 60 years of research that without a doubt, duck numbers are driven by what happens on the breeding grounds. That 3 months of the season accounts for the vast majority. In mallards, 91% of what fluctuations in mallard numbers happen are due to it's a good reproductive season or it's poor. And so, there are a couple of points about that. Hunters often feel this guilt about hunting. We love it, but meanwhile, we love these ducks and we want them to be in great condition. Hunting has nothing to do with duck numbers. We've got 40 years of sound data saying at the levels where limits are set by the feds and season dates, we're having no impact on ducks. So, and likewise, I love seeing money spent in the South to improve hunting locations and public land. But frankly, it's what we do on the breeding grounds that really matters. And so protecting prairie wetlands, job number one, and then making sure ducks have reasonable hatch rates. That's job number two. And that's pretty simple. It sounds simple, but it's a heck of a job. That's what we need to focus on.
Hey, so I'm curious about this. How often do you think states struggle politically? Maybe it's a political conversation about whether they should spend state duck funding within their own state boundaries. There's often going to be political pressures and desires to address conservation efforts in their own states. But if we don't pull our money together and focus on the breeding grounds, we're never really going to impact the situation as it relates to ducks coming to our state down the flyway in any kind of measurable way, are we?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's one of the great things. And hats off to DU because they spent decades sort of educating folks that, hey, it's up on the prairies that matter. And so you need to take some of your state duck stamp dollars, for instance, and send them north to protect wetlands and improve productivity. And so, when we have the trifecta of states, the federal government dollars with NACA dollars, and then frankly, the bigger share is all the private conservation that goes on, fabulous, wealthy duck guys like John Childs from our trip to Argentina, Billy, and then, guys like me that are, a few $1,000s is a big contribution out of my budget, but focusing on sending that money north to help duck breeding habitat, that's really important. So.
You think about, this part of the conversation is happening on an ongoing basis, but the degradation of habitat is, just as more development happened, as more farming land is created, all these things are true in the U.S., but they're also true in the breeding ground. And so it's something we've really got to focus on. If you think about it, in order to really impact it, we're talking about massive amounts of dollars that are necessary to sort of combat that, isn't it?
Well, we really are. We've done a pretty darn good job in the U.S. We're still losing wetlands on critical breeding habitat, but we have really slowed that rate. And so some of our biggest successes have recently been in Prairie Canada. They don't have the same ag policy, the no net loss of wetlands that we instituted in the 80s. They didn't do that until quite recently. We made great success in Manitoba, but sadly, we're still losing wetlands at a really rapid rate in Prairie Canada. And that's where we really need to focus. So.
Well, listen, to the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks here in Mississippi is we've got so many dedicated biologists and scientists that work in there. Houston Havens, who's over the duck program here, he is, first of all, he's a great guy. He's incredibly dedicated, and he listens carefully to what all these wonderful organizations that are focused on these issues do. We're thrilled to have him, and I think Mississippi. We're doing everything in our power to try to move the needle, and Houston's reputation, I assume, Frank. Huh?
Oh yeah, I've known Houston for years and years. Yeah, Houston's a great guy, and they're similar dedicated guys in Louisiana, Alabama, Seth. Yeah.
Yeah, but you think about their work, and I lease 3 farms up in the Mississippi Delta that I'll talk a little bit more about in the second half of the show, but. The farmer that we work with, they're really focused on habitat. They're really focused on doing everything in their power. Because, by the way, they love the duck hunt. They're big. In fact, one of them is a rabid duck hunter, and I'm amazed at the money he's willing to spend to create the best scenario possible. But he's not alone, is he?
Yeah. Oh no. We've seen a revolution throughout the South, actually, and. Lee Fredrickson started the moist soil revolution, and we've seen an awful lot of really great properties. So, frankly, ducks really benefit from having, these hunters that hunt 2 days of the week and provide a ton of food and can winter 200,000 ducks. That's a pretty amazing thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've speaking of Houston Havens and the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, what they're doing on the wildlife management areas has been just a great best practice. They're really focused on doing it the right way, and as a result of that, I mean, some great public duck hunting is taking place as a result of that. It doesn't always just happen on private farms or private land. The public land aspect of this is a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's one of the things that our policy expert John Devney has really worked hard to try and work with federal refuges to make sure that they keep a lot of refuge land open and actually manage it well. And that's a huge benefit, because we know from talking to, hunters like me that can't afford to buy a beautiful place. We depend on public land, and access is really an important issue for maintaining duck hunters. So, yeah, I think it's
okay. You've heard it 1,000 times. Duck season is not going well because they've got too much food north of here. Duck season's not going good because it's getting cold later than it used to. Yeah. Duck season's not going good because the flyway has shifted. Yeah. Duck season's not going good because farm-raised mallards are breeding with migrating mallards. These are all important conversations, no doubt.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's the numbers north of here and the hatchlings. And when you look at that, what does that tell you?
Yeah. We've looked at this a lot, and one of the really most interesting parts is that, I live in North Dakota in Bismarck, and North Dakota has a good duck season year in, year out. And I feel a little guilty for that. And you get down to Mississippi and Louisiana, and you guys are very, very dependent on good production. You need good age ratios. And when we have lousy production, it's the southern states that really get hammered. And that's a little bit unfair. And then, of course, you throw in climate change. When we were in in Argentina. There was a great paper that just got published. Really smart kid out of Lisa Webb's lab up at University of Missouri, and he looked at all the banding data, and really duck distributions have moved north in January, but not that much. And so we really just depend on ducks, being productive on the breeding grounds to have great duck seasons. And the bad news is we're in this kind of dry period. Southern Saskatchewan, just a desert right now. And we really need Saskatchewan to get wet. We're being maintained by kind of good conditions in the Dakotas. North Dakota and South Dakota on the eastern side have had a bunch of good years in a row, and it's still good. But other than that, we got a crew out in Alberta that's just having a terrible time finding a few duck nests. It's so dry. So that's what we need in production.
Talking about migrations, I was looking at some data the other day showing the data, years of data on a map showing, slight changes in migration patterns of various species.
Yeah.
And what I had heard seemed to be very dramatic. But when you look at it on the map, it's not dramatic at all, is it?
No, it really isn't. This paper by Bram, has these great maps that show where 50% of the mallards are. And they're a bit farther north in Arkansas, but they're still in Arkansas. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Hey, Frank, I can't wait to have you back. We're going to spend maybe a whole show together next time we meet. But this has been Frank Rohwer, who's the president and chief scientist for Delta Waterfowl, and he's going to be a good new friend for SuperTalk Outdoors. Hey, when we come back, we have Mike McCormick from the Farm Bureau. We'll see you after this break.